if you're watching this video, there's a high probability that you're looking to do something different or change the trajectory of your life. And I feel like one of the greatest things that can help you do that is detaching yourself from your ego. So in today's presentation, we're going to break down exactly how to do it and what letting go looks like. So this is going to relate to philosophy. I'm just going to break down different ways that this can help you grow as an individual. So let's start. Okay. So the concept of ego detachment is two things. There is a way in which it is a construct, meaning that it is psychological, has a sense of self, and arises from experiences and beliefs. So this is where the life that you have lived, the places that you've been, and the people that you associated yourself with has fed into and or built up what this ego looks like. You could be someone who has a small, reduced vision of themselves, and therefore you have a small ego. And that may have been because you grew up in an environment in which you weren't able to be yourself freely, and you were always talked down upon. You were always seen as lesser than you really are. But there's also the contrast where you can have an ego that is ginormous because that you were in an environment or you've been in a place or you let certain accomplishments that you may have achieved at a young age or achieved, period, allow that to be the definition of who you are. And I just want to tell you guys something about that sort of ego. When those things are gone, who are you actually? Right? That's what you need to ask yourself. And then in terms of being someone who has a smaller ego or feels less than they really are, you need to ask yourself this question. Why aren't you as big as you could be, you know? And that could be seen as conflicting, but I just want to show you in this particular example here that no matter what side you come from, you have to make a decision about who you're going to be. And often this is tied to ego. Furthermore, ego is a possible way to work with was the detachment, right? So ego detachment involves letting go of this sense of self that you've allowed to be your, I guess, your North Star, if you will, and allowing yourself to let go of that then leaves room for growth. It allows you to decide who you're going to be regardless of who you've been taught to be through your life, right? This allows you to have room for growth. Now, the ego can be a humongous burden because of these three reasons. Your attachment to your ego oftentimes have some sort of deep, integrated part of your personality, right? And sometimes, like I was saying to you earlier, your accomplishments, so your social status, things of that nature, can truly feed into this ego. You can be someone who has a certain title, so therefore you feel above others, right? Feeding into ego. You can be someone who has been in a place where you've had huge houses, huge cars, all expensive jewelry, all these types of things, but you still lost yourself. And what does it benefit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul, right? So I just want you guys to understand that when it comes to this, your ego can be a place of suffering, right? Because if you feed too much into it, it can destroy you. Furthermore, when you have a ego problem, when you're not detached from it, you fear change. You are resistant to growth, essentially, right? You don't allow yourself to be adaptable. And when you aren't adaptable, you find yourself repeating old patterns and losing sight of yourself. Furthermore, when you're attached to your singular, ego and what you've been, quote unquote, predetermined to be as, you furthermore put yourself in a position where you have a lack of perspective. You are so confined to the way that you think that you don't allow yourself to see things for a different way. And this causes you to lose compassion. This allows you to lose creativity and ultimately end up being someone who is not as fully fledged, human, as great as they could be. So when in terms of this, like I mentioned before, there's three places you can find ego release talked about when it comes to philosophy. That's in Buddhism, Stoicism, and Taoism, right? Within Taoism, I want to emphasize here, Wu Wei means non-action, and they focus on letting go of the control impulses, right? And embracing the natural flow of life, right? So kind of think of water, if you will, right? Buddhism teaches you to do that through stillness, right? Do that through meditation, do deep breathing, do deep internal work. When it comes to Stoicism, it is from a perspective of releasing things that you have no control over, releasing things that have power over you and letting go of that nature. So that's one way that ego can be released in terms of each of these philosophical principles. Now, how do you gain freedom and control by letting go of your ego? Well, it's three simple things. Whenever you let go of your ego, you become light, right? You are no longer confined to the rigid mentality that you've built up around this said ego. Furthermore, that leads you to have increased joy, meaning that you can find yourself having more, what's the word I'm looking for? Contentment. Yeah. So you can find yourself having more contentment. You can find yourself being in a place where you feel free and joy because you're no longer tied to the emotions of that ego that would, minimize you, or the emotions of that ego that could destroy you, right? Furthermore, you allow yourself to have space for genuine connections, right? So if you're someone that lives in a place where your ego controls everything that you do, when it's hard to interact with other people, you find it extremely difficult to connect with other people and be compassionate because your own ideal says no. But when you let go of this, you break that barrier, it allows you to connect with the person authentically, as being yourself. So when you lose your ego, this is how you rebuild it, right? You have to acknowledge and accept the pattern and be okay of letting go of any sort of judgment related to it. You then have to become mindful about it. So this is through meditation, maybe journaling, maybe a certain exercise or joining a certain, Bible study even, for instance, just things of that nature that put you in a mindful stillness, sort of how Buddhism preaches, right? Furthermore, you have to be open to change when you are too stuck in your ways. You cannot change. And the one thing that's common and guaranteed in human life is change. So you have to be able to let go of that and not feel it be a threat to your ego. When it comes to empowering yourself and embracing the unknown, you have to let go of the uncertainty because ego thrives on the certainty, right? When you know something, quote unquote, yourself being a certain way, you live in that space and it does not give you room for growth. Therefore, you're attached to a certain thing. And when things don't go the way that you expect them to, you find, and that's where you don't want to be. You have to be willing to embrace the unknown. Then you have to be able to trust the process. Plain and simple. Let go of what you can't control and control the controllables. Furthermore, you need to find meaning within uncertainty, right? You have to discover that through this process of not knowing, not having a definite, standpoint that you're going to say, okay, this is my new stability, this is my new ground place. You're allowing yourself to have room for the growth that comes through releasing of your ego, right? Because when you have your ego, you're attached to this. Think of your ego as an anchor in the ocean. You're in the ocean. You're free to move anywhere you want to, but as soon as you drop that anchor, that's where you're going to stay until you decide to pull the anchor up. Until you decide to now then steer that ship a different way. So think of your ego as something very similar. Now, when it comes to finding fulfillment and letting go of your ego, there's three aspects to this, right? You have to be willing to accept yourself as you are. Flaws, you might have fucked up teeth. Not me, though. You might have bad eyesight, like myself, for instance. You might just be someone who has a battered and bruised history and, have had challenges, and that's why you have such a stiff wall up. But if you allow yourself to be accepting of who you are, that opens the door for the ego to be released, right? If you're honest with yourself, you're gonna find it a lot easier to actually move forward. And this is something huge that's helped me, and this is something I talked about in my community and my 7 pillars is for me to get to the place I am today, I genuinely had to do a lot of deep work, and I had to release this expectation I put upon myself to be this, that, and the third. And I had to be open to becoming that person. I had to be open to allowing myself to grow into that person. I couldn't just sit there and allow myself to say, hey, okay, I am this person, this is it. I had to be able to give myself room to grow. And that's where it's so important to start where you are, because wherever you are is how you go from this to this, right? Nobody's born at the end yet. You have to be open and willing to accept that this life is a fucking process. And if you're able to go through the process, you're going to find inner peace. And when you find inner peace, oftentimes all of this becomes as a result of being authentic. Live your life how you're meant to live it. If you're fucked up and you have no money, okay, cool. That's a lot of people. Accept that and then make a plan to move forward. Release the weight that you put on top of yourself for not being where you expect it to be already. Let go of that And that's the only way you're going to make room to then go and become that person, right? And that's why it's so important to be able to find your fulfillment through the process and not the goal. I cannot reiterate enough. You have to be able to find your enjoyment, find your fulfillment through the process and not the goal, because the goal can move. But if you fall in love with the process, everything becomes joyful, right? In conclusion, though, whenever you let go of your ego, you find yourself being free. And ultimately, that's what we're all seeking, right? Freedom from a system, freedom from, maybe a life that we don't want to live. But freedom is what all humans want in some degree or another, right? So you let go of your ego, you're able to find yourself being more free, because it unlocks and unblocks really this sort of self-imposed limitation. Then when you move forward, allow yourself to grow from that place. This opens the space that you need to then transform. And lastly, by doing this, you then become someone that lives in their authentic life, lives in your authentic truth. The reason this is so important is because there's not enough people truly living as they are. And I feel like if more people just documented the process of where they are to where they want to get to, they would find so much more joy in that process, and people will be behind them. People will rally. I haven't hit 100,000 plus a month just yet. My best month has probably been like 40,000, and that's cool. But there was a time where I have literally been all the way up here and dropped so dramatically, guys. Like, I've been in a place where I was literally destroyed. I've been in a place where I went all the way to the tops of the mountains, and then I went down to zero. And that was actually in 2024. Like, I was all the way up here and I fell all the way down to the bottom and went even below further where I had been. But it's because I decided to let go of my ego that I was able to then create the foundation that was necessary to get back to this place, to then be able to say, okay, cool. If I can get to 40,000, why can't I get to 100? Why can't I get to 400,000, right? I just have to have faith in myself and make the necessary steps, right? I have to let go of the ego and fully lean into the person I know I was meant to be. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you guys. This was a lot longer than I actually expected, and I can go a lot deeper actually. So if you guys want to see a further information about this, please let me know and I'll do a whole different setup or whatever. But furthermore, I also have a community where you guys can also find this video, and I have other unreleased videos in that community as well. It's all going to be linked down below or in my bio if you're over on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But I just want you guys to understand you have to let yourself go, because as soon as you do that, you give yourself the space you need to be you. Plain and simple. Love you guys. Peace.